The poison was already working when I walked into the exam hall. My hands trembled as I gripped my pencil, watching the words on the page blur and swim like fish in murky water. Around me, other students scribbled furiously, their pens scratching against paper in a symphony of academic ambition. But I could barely focus on the first question. My stomach churned violently, and cold sweat beaded on my forehead despite the air conditioning that hummed overhead. I knew what this was. I'd felt it before, in another life. The proctor glanced my way, her eyes narrowing with suspicion rather than concern. I wanted to raise my hand, to call for help, but my throat constricted. The room tilted sideways, and I gripped the edge of my desk to steady myself. This was my entrance exam to Whitmore Academy, the most prestigious preparatory school in the state. The exam that would determine my entire future. The exam I'd studied for relentlessly, sacrificing sleep and sanity to master every possible question. The exam my stepsister Elena had just poisoned me for. In my previous life, I hadn't understood what happened. I'd collapsed halfway through the test, been rushed to the hospital, and by the time I recovered, the opportunity was gone. Elena had taken my place at Whitmore, had stolen the scholarship that should have been mine, had used it as a launching pad to everything I'd ever dreamed of, and I'd spent the next 10 years believing it was just bad luck, a tragic coincidence, food poisoning from a school cafeteria lunch. But now I knew better. Now I remembered everything. The morning I turned 33, I died in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway. My life a catalog of missed opportunities and quiet desperation. And then I woke up in my 16-year-old body on the morning of my birthday, the birthday no one in my family remembered or cared about, with 10 years of memories burning in my mind like prophecy. I'd watched Elena that morning, really watched her, as she handed me a protein smoothie with a sympathetic smile. "You look nervous about the exam," she'd said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I made this special for you. It'll help you focus." In my first life, I'd drunk it gratefully, touched by her rare kindness. This time, I'd poured it down the sink when she wasn't looking and filled the cup with water. I'd watched her face carefully, searching for any sign of disappointment or alarm. But Elena was a masterful actress. She'd simply smiled and wished me luck, her blue eyes, dad's eyes, twinkling with what anyone else would have mistaken for sisterly affection. I should have been safe. I should have been ready. But I'd underestimated her thoroughness. She must have anticipated my suspicion, must have had a backup plan. The apple I'd eaten at breakfast, the one I'd grabbed myself from the fruit bowl, had been injected with something. Probably with a syringe through the stem where the tiny puncture wound would be, so invisible. Clever. So terribly clever. My vision doubled, then tripled. The exam questions became hieroglyphics, meaningless symbols dancing across the page. I managed to write my name at the top of the paper, but even that looked like the scrawl of a drunk. Around me, students continued working, oblivious to my deteriorating condition. The proctor had returned to her desk, satisfied that I wasn't cheating. No one cared. No one ever cared about Iris Chen. The last thing I remembered before passing out was the sound of my pencil hitting the floor, rolling away across the linoleum with a hollow clatter that seemed to echo forever. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later, my mother sitting beside me with a martyred expression that I recognized all too well. "Finally," Catherine Chen said, not bothering to hide her irritation. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this has been? Everyone at the club is asking questions. They think we don't feed you properly." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We were so worried." Just concern about her social standing at the country club where she played tennis with other wealthy wives and gossiped over champagne brunches. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in the acoustic panels. In my previous life, this moment had broken something fundamental in me. I'd apologized profusely, had believed somehow that my collapse was my fault, had internalized my mother's disappointment as my own failure. But I was 33 years old in my mind now, and I understood exactly what Catherine Chen was. A woman who had never wanted me, who had seen me only as an obligation from my father's first marriage, who had spent 16 years wishing I would simply disappear so she could play happy family with Dad, Elena, and my younger half-brother Marcus. "Where's Dad?" I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. "At an important meeting," Catherine said, examining her manicured nails. "He can't drop everything just because you decided to cause a scene." "It's my birthday." The words came out flat, emotionless. I wasn't sure why I'd said them. Perhaps some small part of me still hoped for a reaction, some flicker of maternal guilt or remembered affection. Catherine blinked, her perfectly shaped eyebrows rising slightly. Oh, is it? She checked her phone, swiping through her calendar with practiced efficiency. Well, you're 16 now, practically an adult. Surely you don't expect us to make a fuss. In my previous life, they'd thrown Elena a party for her sweet 16 that cost more than some people's cars. A rented ballroom at the Hilton, a live band, a custom cake shaped like a fairy tale castle, 200 guests, and a brand new Mercedes with a giant bow on it parked out front. The pictures from that party had been plastered all over Elena's social media for months, each one a tiny knife in my heart. My sweet 16 had been forgotten entirely. Not even a card, not even a cupcake with a single candle. The exam, I said, pushing away the memory. What happened with the exam? Catherine's expression tightened. You failed, obviously. You didn't even complete half of it before you passed out. The school board was very understanding, given your episode. But they've already awarded the scholarship to Elena. She scored in the 98th percentile. We're all very proud of her. Of course they were. The doctors, I said carefully. What did they say was wrong with me? Some kind of food poisoning. They ran tests, but couldn't find anything specific. Probably something you ate at school. Catherine stood up, smoothing her designer skirt. The doctor will discharge you this afternoon. Your father expects you home by dinner. And Iris? She paused at the door, her voice taking on a sharp edge. Try not to be so melodramatic in the future. This kind of attention-seeking behavior is beneath this family. The door clicked shut behind her, and I was alone. I stared at my hands, turning them over slowly. These were the hands of a 16-year-old, smooth and unmarred, but they carried the memory of 33 years. In my previous life, I'd spent those years trying desperately to win my family's love, bending and breaking myself into shapes they might approve of, always coming up short. I'd watched from the sidelines as Elena succeeded at everything, as she got the attention, the resources, the unconditional support that I'd craved. I'd watched her steal my achievements, claim credit for my ideas, manipulate situations to make me look incompetent or troublesome. And because she was beautiful and charming, and Dad's biological daughter, everyone always believed her version of events. By the time I was 33 in my first life, I was working as a junior accountant at a mid-level firm, living in a studio apartment I could barely afford, with no friends and no prospects. I'd cut off contact with my family years earlier, but the damage they'd done had already calcified into my bones, shaping every decision I made, every relationship I failed to maintain. And then Elena had called me out of the blue with an invitation to Marcus's wedding. We miss you, she'd said, her voice warm and persuasive. Family should be together for important occasions. Let's let the past be the past. I'd been so starved for connection, so desperate to believe that maybe they'd changed, that maybe I'd finally be welcomed home. I'd driven through that rainstorm to get to the wedding venue, my windshield wipers fighting against the deluge, my heart full of fragile hope. The semi-truck had jackknifed on the wet highway, and I'd had maybe 2 seconds to realize what was happening before impact. Now I had a second chance, not just at life, but at justice. I pressed the call button for the nurse and asked for my phone. When it arrived, I opened the browser and began researching, my fingers flying across the screen with newfound purpose. I acknowledged that no 16-year-old should possess 10 years of future events, stock market trends, technological innovations, political shifts. I knew which companies would soar and which would crash. I knew which real estate markets would boom. I knew which cryptocurrency would emerge from obscurity to dominate the financial landscape. But more importantly, I knew every dirty secret my family thought they'd hidden. I knew about Dad's offshore accounts. I knew about Catherine's affair with the tennis instructor. I knew about Elena's habit of plagiarizing papers and buying test answers. I knew about Marcus's gambling problem that would eventually spiral out of control. In my previous life, I'd learned these things gradually, painful revelation by painful revelation, each one explaining a little more about why I'd never been good enough. But I'd been powerless to do anything with that knowledge, too broken and isolated to fight back. This time would be different. This time, I wouldn't waste energy trying to win their love or prove my worth. This time, I would systematically dismantle everything they'd built on foundations of cruelty and lies. And I would do it so carefully, so perfectly, that they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. The nurse returned with discharge papers, and I signed them with a steady hand. My real Sweet 16 was just beginning. The Chen family lived in Westbrook Heights, an exclusive gated community where the houses were measured in wings rather than bedrooms, and the annual homeowners association fees cost more than the average American salary. Our house, though I'd never really thought of it as ours, was a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa with a fountain in the circular driveway and enough square footage to comfortably house 3 normal families. When the taxi dropped me off that afternoon, the house was empty except for Maria, our housekeeper, who greeted me with genuine warmth that made my chest ache. "Miss Iris, we were so worried." Maria pulled me into a gentle hug, careful of my supposed fragility. She was a small, round woman in her 50s who had been with the family since before Dad married Catherine. She was possibly the only person in that house who had ever shown me consistent kindness. "I'm okay, Maria, really. I made your favorite soup. You should eat, build up your strength." She fussed over me, guiding me to the kitchen island and ladling out a bowl of chicken soup that steamed invitingly. "Your family, they had to go to Elena's celebration dinner. The scholarship, you know. But they said they'll be back late." Of course they did. Of course, Elena's achievement required an immediate celebration dinner while I convalesced alone. The parallel was so perfectly on brand that I almost laughed. "Maria," I said carefully, watching her face. "Did anyone ask about me before they left?" Her expression fell slightly, and I saw the answer before she spoke. "They were very excited about Elena's news." "I understand." I ate the soup slowly, savoring the warmth and Maria's care. "Maria, do you remember when my real mother was alive?" Maria stilled, her hands pausing in their cleaning. We'd never talked about this before. It had always been an unspoken taboo in the house. Catherine had systematically erased all traces of my mother from the house within months of marrying Dad, replacing family photos and redecorating with ruthless efficiency. "Yes," Maria said quietly. "Mrs. Helen. She was a very kind woman." "What was she like?" Maria sat down across from me, her eyes distant with memory. "She was gentle. And smart, so smart. She worked as a research scientist, before she got sick. She loved to read, and she loved music. She played piano beautifully." She smiled sadly. "You have her eyes. And her smile, when you let yourself smile." My mother had died of cancer when I was 6. My memories of her were fragmented, dreamlike. A soft voice, singing lullabies, gentle hands braiding my hair, the smell of lavender perfume. Dad had remarried within a year, bringing Catherine and 8-year-old Elena into our lives with jarring speed. "Where are her things?" I asked. "Her belongings, her research papers, her photos?" Maria hesitated. "Mrs. Catherine, she said it was too painful for your father to keep them. Most things were donated or thrown away, but—" She glanced toward the stairs, lowering her voice. "I kept some boxes in the storage room in the attic. I couldn't bear to see everything disappear. Your father never goes up there, and Miss Catherine doesn't know." My heart stuttered. In my previous life, I'd never known those boxes existed. I'd never thought to ask Maria about my mother, too cowed by Catherine's implicit ban on the subject and too afraid of seeming disloyal to Dad's new family. "Can you show me?" We climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, a dusty, neglected space filled with old furniture and holiday decorations. In the far corner, behind a stack of boxes labeled Christmas and Halloween, were 3 medium-sized boxes with no labels at all. Maria pulled them out carefully, brushing away dust. "I should have told you before, but you were so young when she passed, and then with the new family, I didn't want to cause trouble." "You've given me a gift," I said, meaning it. Thank you, Maria. She left me alone with the boxes, and I opened them with trembling hands. The first box contained photo albums, pictures of my mother pregnant, radiant and glowing, pictures of her holding infant me, her face soft with an almost painful love, pictures of the three of us, mom, dad, and me, looking like a real family. Dad's smile genuine in a way I'd never seen in my conscious memory. The second box held her journals, leather-bound books filled with her neat handwriting. I flipped through them carefully, my throat tight. She'd documented her research, her thoughts on motherhood, her hopes for my future. On the final pages, written when she must have known she was dying, were letters addressed to me. "My dearest Iris," one began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry I couldn't stay with you longer. I want you to know that you are brilliant and capable and deserving of every good thing. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Never shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectations. You come from strength, from intelligence, from love. Remember that always." I pressed my hand to my mouth, stifling a sob. In my previous life, I'd needed to hear these words so desperately. I'd needed proof that I'd been loved, that I'd mattered to someone, that I wasn't inherently defective or unworthy. The third box contained her research papers and her laptop, an old model, probably defunct by now, but precious nonetheless. And at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was a jewelry box. Inside was a stunning diamond necklace, delicate and elegant, with a platinum setting that caught the dusty light. A note was tucked inside. "For Iris, on her 16th birthday, may she always know her worth. Love, Mom." She'd planned ahead, even knowing she was dying. She'd thought of my future milestones, had tried to leave me pieces of herself to discover when I needed them. I put the necklace on, feeling the weight of it settle against my collarbone. It fit perfectly, and when I caught my reflection in an old mirror leaning against the wall, I saw my mother looking back at me. I gathered the boxes and brought them to my room, the only space in the house that was truly mine, though even that was a small, plain room on the third floor, while Elena had an entire suite on the second floor with a walk-in closet and an ensuite bathroom. I hid the boxes in my closet, then sat at my desk and opened my laptop. Time to begin. My first move was research. I spent the next week meticulously documenting everything I remembered from my previous life, creating encrypted files with detailed timelines. I noted which stocks would surge, which companies would fail, which real estate markets would explode. I documented every family secret, every piece of leverage I might need, but I also researched something else: my mother's work. Dr. Helen Chen had been a biochemist specializing in pharmaceutical research. According to her papers and the articles I found in academic databases, she'd been on the verge of a significant breakthrough in cancer treatment when she'd gotten sick herself. Her research had been absorbed by the pharmaceutical company she'd worked for, Pharmatech Solutions, but had never been developed further. I dove deeper, following citation trails and patent filings, and I discovered something interesting. The company had shelved my mother's research, not because it was flawed, but because it threatened their existing, highly profitable cancer drug line. They'd buried potentially life-saving treatment to protect their bottom line. In my mother's journals, she'd written about her frustration with the corporate interference, her growing suspicion that her illness wasn't natural. The entries near the end were darker, paranoid, filled with fears that someone was sabotaging her work and possibly her health. I'd dismissed it as the fears of a dying woman when I first read them, but now with the perspective of 2 lifetimes, I wondered. Pharmatech Solutions was now run by William Ashford, a name I recognized from my previous life. He'd been one of Dad's business associates, someone who'd attended Elena's wedding in my first life. Someone Dad had mentioned wanting to do business with, someone Catherine had courted for social connections. The pieces were clicking together in ways I hadn't expected. But I needed to be strategic. I couldn't reveal what I knew all at once. I needed to build resources, establish independence, create a position of strength before I struck. I started small. First, I needed money. In my previous life, I'd had access to a small trust fund from my mother's life insurance, but it had been controlled by Dad until I turned 21. In this timeline, I was years away from that access. But I remembered the account details, and I knew something Dad and Catherine didn't. There was a provision in the trust that allowed me to access emergency funds for education or medical expenses with proper documentation. I scheduled an appointment with the trust administrator, a lawyer named Mr. Patterson who had been friends with my mother. I went alone, taking the bus across town to his office, and I brought my mother's letters with me. Mr. Patterson was an elderly man with kind eyes and a professorial air. He remembered me from when I was small, though I'd only met him a few times. "Miss Chen," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "This is unexpected. How can I help you?" "I want to access my trust fund," I said directly, "for educational purposes." He frowned slightly. "Your father handles those requests. You should speak with him first." "My father has never approved any requests," I said. "And I need funds for private tutoring and SAT prep courses. I've been struggling academically, and I don't want to burden my family further." It was a careful lie, designed to appeal to his sympathy while avoiding the truth that Dad had systematically denied me resources while lavishing them on Elena. Mr. Patterson pulled up my file on his computer, his frown deepening as he read. "I see. Your father has denied 3 previous requests over the past 2 years. I wasn't aware of that." He looked up at me, his eyes sharp. "Tell me the truth, Iris. Is everything all right at home?" I hesitated, then decided to trust him. "Mr. Patterson, did you know my mother well?" "Very well. Helen was a remarkable woman. Her death was a terrible loss." "Did she ever talk to you about concerns about her work or her illness?" His expression shifted, becoming guarded. "Why do you ask?" "I found her journals. She mentions you. She mentions being afraid." A long silence stretched between us. Finally, he sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair. "Your mother believed she was being poisoned," he said quietly. "She came to me 3 weeks before she died and made me promise to look after you. She updated her will, set up your trust fund, made arrangements. She was convinced that someone at Pharmatech wanted her research buried and was willing to kill her for it." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Did you believe her?" "I didn't want to," he admitted. "It sounded paranoid, impossible. But Helen was one of the most rational people I knew, and her cancer was aggressive, unusual. The doctors were puzzled by how quickly it spread." He paused. "I did some quiet investigation after she died, but I had no proof of anything. The company had covered its tracks well, if there were any tracks to cover." "And my father?" Mr. Patterson's expression became carefully neutral. "Your father remarried very quickly. He seemed eager to move on. I've always wondered if he knew more than he let on, or if he was simply a man who couldn't handle grief. Or if he was complicit, I thought, but didn't say. Dad worked in finance, had connections throughout the corporate world, could have been bought or threatened into silence. It wouldn't have been hard to manipulate a grieving widower, to convince him that his wife's fears were just paranoid delusions of a dying brain." "I need your help," I said. "I need access to my trust fund, and I need information about my mother's research. Everything you know, everything she told you." Mr. Patterson studied me for a long moment. "You look like her," he said finally. "Not just physically. There's something in your eyes, a determination." He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll approve emergency educational funding. $5,000 to start, more if you need it. And I'll give you copies of everything your mother left with me." He paused. "But Iris, be careful. If your mother was right, if someone was willing to kill her, they might not hesitate to eliminate threats now." "I'll be careful," I promised. I left his office an hour later with a cashier's check, a folder of documents, and a flash drive containing encrypted copies of my mother's research. I also had Mr. Patterson's private number and his promise to help however he could. It was a beginning. That night at dinner, I wore my mother's necklace. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Catherine's face went white, then red, her fork clattering against her plate. "Where did you get that?" "It was my mother's," I said calmly, cutting my chicken with precise movements. "She left it for me." "I threw out all of her things," Catherine hissed. "That necklace should have been donated years ago." "You threw out my mother's belongings without asking me?" I looked up, meeting her eyes steadily. That seems cruel, even for you. The table fell silent. Dad looked up from his phone, finally paying attention. Elena watched with barely concealed delight, always happy to see conflict that didn't center on her. Marcus, only 12, kept his head down and continued eating. Iris, Dad said, his tone warning, don't speak to Catherine that way. Why not? She can insult my dead mother, but I can't point out that throwing away a child's inheritance is cruel? Dad's jaw tightened. Your mother's things were removed to help everyone move forward. It was a difficult time. It was difficult for you, so you erased her. I was 6 years old and you erased every trace of her existence from my life. You married Catherine within a year and acted like Mom never existed. I kept my voice level, emotionless, stating facts rather than accusations. Did you know she left journals, letters for me? Something flickered in Dad's eyes. Fear, guilt, I couldn't tell which. I don't know what you think you found, but I found proof that she loved me, that she thought I was smart and capable and worthy. That's more than I've ever gotten from this family. I stood up, leaving my half-finished plate. Thank you for dinner. I'm not hungry anymore. I walked out before anyone could respond, my heart pounding but my steps steady. I'd made my first open move, planted my first seed of discord. They'd underestimated me for so long, seen me as weak and compliant. Now I was serving notice that the dynamic had changed. Behind me, I heard Catherine's voice rise in fury, demanding that Dad do something about my insolence. But I also heard uncertainty in her tone, a crack in her usual confidence. Good. Over the next few weeks, I implemented my plan in careful stages. First, I used my trust fund money to hire a private tutor. Not for academics, but for something else. I hired a college student studying computer science to teach me advanced programming and cybersecurity. In my previous life, I'd picked up basic computer skills through necessity, but now I needed to become an expert. Second, I opened several online investment accounts using my mother's old laptop and information that couldn't be traced back to me easily. I made careful, calculated investments based on my knowledge of the future. A startup called MicroDrive that would revolutionize data storage, a renewable energy company that would win a massive government contract, a pharmaceutical company that would develop a blockbuster drug. Within 3 weeks, my initial $5,000 had grown to $15,000. Within 2 months, it would be $50,000. Within 6 months, it would be $200,000. I was building a war chest. Third, I began documenting everything. I installed hidden cameras in common areas of the house, not in bathrooms or bedrooms, nothing invasive, but in the living room, kitchen, and Dad's home office. I backed up every recording to encrypted cloud storage. Fourth, I reconnected with my mother's old colleagues. I reached out to former pharmatech researchers, using my mother's name and reputation to gain access. I asked questions carefully, gathering information about her final project, about the company's decision to shelve it, about William Ashford's rise to power. And slowly, a picture emerged. My mother had been murdered. Not directly, not with a gun or a knife, but with a carefully administered poison that mimicked aggressive cancer. Ashford had ordered it, afraid that her research would disrupt the profitable status quo. And Dad had known, or at least suspected, but had been paid off with a lucrative consulting contract and stock options. His remarriage to Catherine had been part of moving on, of burying the past, of accepting blood money. The knowledge burned in my chest like acid. My father had sold out his first wife's memory for money and convenience. He'd let her murderer go free. He'd raised me in the house of my mother's killer's business partner. But I couldn't act on this yet. I needed more proof, ironclad documentation, evidence that would stand up in court. I needed to be patient. That patience was tested daily, living in that house, watching Elena bask in praise while I was ignored, listening to Catherine's cutting remarks, seeing Dad's indifference. It required every ounce of my self-control not to lash out, not to reveal what I knew. Elena started at Whitmore Academy in the fall, and her social media became a constant chronicle of her perfect life. Perfect grades, perfect friends, perfect everything. She posted photos of herself in designer clothes, at exclusive parties, accepting awards and accolades. And always, She made sure I saw them. She'd show me her phone at dinner, laughing about some party I wasn't invited to, some achievement I couldn't claim. She thought she was twisting the knife, making me jealous. She didn't realize I was taking notes. My 17th birthday came and went without acknowledgement, just like my 16th. I didn't expect anything different. Instead, I took myself out to dinner with my own money, treating myself to an expensive meal at a restaurant downtown. I wore my mother's necklace and felt her presence with me, a quiet strength. The next day, I received a package from Mr. Patterson. Inside was another box of my mother's belongings, these ones more personal, her wedding ring, more photos, a few pieces of her jewelry. And tucked in the bottom was something else. A key to a safe deposit box. I went to the bank the next day. The safe deposit box was in my mother's name, but I was listed as authorized. Inside were documents, the originals of her research papers, patent applications, and most importantly, a detailed journal documenting her final months. Names, dates, meetings, evidence of corporate malfeasance, of Ashford's interference, of threats made, and a letter addressed to me, dated just days before she died. "My darling Iris," it read, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope it was natural, but I fear it wasn't. I've documented everything I know about what's happening at Pharmatech. I've recorded conversations, saved emails, kept meticulous notes. This evidence could destroy William Ashford and expose the corruption in the pharmaceutical industry, but it could also put you in danger. I'm leaving the choice to you. If you want to live a quiet life, destroy these documents and forget you ever saw them. But if you want to fight, if you want justice for me and for all the patients who could have been saved by my research, use this information. I believe in you, Iris. Whatever you choose, know that I love you more than anything in this world, Mom." I sat in the bank's private viewing room, holding the letter with shaking hands. My mother had given me a weapon. She'd trusted me to decide whether to wield it. The choice was easy. Christmas that year was particularly unbearable. The house was decorated like a magazine spread, with a massive tree in the foyer and twinkling lights everywhere. Catherine hosted her annual holiday party, and I was expected to help serve drinks and appetizers like hired help while Elena held court in a designer gown, accepting compliments from guests. William Ashford attended the party with his wife, a brittle-looking woman dripping in diamonds. I watched him carefully, this man who had killed my mother, as he laughed and clinked glasses with my father. He didn't even remember me. When Catherine introduced us, he looked right through me, already moving on to more important people. I served him champagne with a smile and memorized every word he said. Later that night, after the guests left, I was cleaning up the kitchen when Elena cornered me. "You know," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, "you look so much like the help sometimes. Maybe that's your true calling. You're certainly not cut out for anything else." In my previous life, this kind of comment had shredded me. I'd internalized it, believed it, let it shape my self-perception. Now I just smiled. "You know, Elena, I've been thinking about that exam. The one I missed because of food poisoning." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "What about it?" "Funny thing about poison. It shows up in blood tests, and medical records are kept for years." I tilted my head. I wonder what a detective would find if they looked closely at that day, at what I ate, at who prepared my food. "You had food poisoning from the school cafeteria," Elena said, but her voice was too careful. Everyone knows that. "Do they? Because I don't remember eating anything at school that day. I remember eating at home. That apple from the fruit bowl, the one that tasted slightly off." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Did you know that certain poisons can mimic food poisoning symptoms? That they're hard to detect if no one's looking for them specifically?" Elena's face went pale. "You're insane. Making up conspiracy theories because you couldn't handle the pressure of the exam." "Maybe," I said lightly, Kai. "Or maybe I'm finally paying attention. Maybe I'm noticing patterns, like how often I've gotten mysteriously sick before important events. Like how my scholarship applications kept getting lost. Like how my recommendation letters somehow never made it to the right people." I smiled. It's amazing what you see when you stop assuming everyone has your best interests at heart. I walked away, leaving her standing in the kitchen, her composure finally cracked. It was a risk, showing my hand like that. But I wanted Elena paranoid. I wanted her making mistakes. Fear would make her sloppy. The spring of my junior year, I made my next major move. I'd spent months building my investment portfolio, and it had grown to nearly $500,000. I'd also been quietly working with Mr. Patterson and a private investigator to gather evidence about my mother's death. Now I was ready to start the offensive. First target, Elena's academic fraud. I'd remembered from my previous life that Elena had cheated her way through high school, buying papers and test answers through a sophisticated network of tutors and services. She'd been caught eventually. In my first life, it had been during her sophomore year of college, leading to her expulsion. But the evidence had been murky, and Dad's lawyers had managed to negotiate a quiet withdrawal instead of formal expulsion. This time, I had the advantage of foreknowledge. I knew which services she used, which papers she'd buy, which tests she'd cheat on, and I had the technical skills now to track her digital footprint. I spent 3 months carefully documenting everything. Every plagiarized paper, every purchased test answer, every instance of fraud. I created a comprehensive file with timestamps, screenshots, payment records, and comparison analyses showing the original sources of her supposedly original work. Then I waited for the perfect moment. That moment came when Elena was nominated for the prestigious Manning Scholarship, a full ride to any Ivy League school plus a substantial stipend. It was one of the most competitive scholarships in the country, and Elena's perfect GPA and glowing recommendations made her a frontrunner. The same scholarship I should have been eligible for if I'd been able to take that entrance exam properly. I sent the evidence anonymously to the Manning Scholarship Committee, to Whitmore Academy's administration, and to the Academic Integrity Board. I used encrypted email accounts, routed through VPNs, untraceable. And I sent it with a simple message. Elena Chen's application is built on fraud. The attached evidence proves systematic academic dishonesty. In the interest of fairness to honest candidates, this information must be investigated. The fallout was spectacular. Within a week, Elena was called into the principal's office. An investigation was launched. The evidence was too overwhelming to dismiss. I'd been thorough, meticulous, providing proof that even Dad's lawyers couldn't explain away. Elena came home that evening in tears, Catherine close behind her, both of them raging. I was in my room studying when I heard the commotion downstairs. "It's sabotage!" Catherine shrieked. "Someone is trying to destroy Elena's future." "The evidence is fabricated," Elena sobbed. "Someone hacked my accounts, planted fake information. I would never cheat." I walked downstairs slowly, drawn by the drama. Dad was in his office, on the phone with his lawyer, his face red with fury. Marcus was hiding in his room. Smart kid. Catherine spotted me on the stairs. "You," she hissed, her eyes wild with accusation. "You did this. You're jealous of Elena's success, so you're trying to ruin her." I raised my eyebrows. "Me? I'm not that technically sophisticated. Besides, why would I bother? Elena's success has never affected me." "Liar!" Elena lunged toward me, but Catherine grabbed her arm. "You've been acting strange for months, making comments, wearing that stupid necklace, challenging us. You did this." "Elena," I said calmly, "if you didn't cheat, then an investigation will clear you. You should welcome the chance to prove your innocence." "The investigation is a joke," Catherine snapped. "They're treating her like a criminal." "Maybe because the evidence shows she is one?" I descended the last few stairs, standing my ground. "I've seen the reports online. They found dozens of instances of plagiarism. Test answers that match purchased answer keys. Payment records to essay mills. That's not fabricated. That's systematic fraud." Dad emerged from his office, his phone call finished. "Enough," he said, his voice hard. "Iris, go to your room. This doesn't concern you." Actually, it does. Elena took the Whitmore scholarship that should have been mine. She's gotten opportunities I was denied because I was conveniently sick at crucial moments. I looked directly at Elena. Did you think I'd never figure it out? Did you think you could keep poisoning me and I'd never catch on? The room went silent. Even Catherine seemed shocked by the accusation. Poisoning? Dad repeated, his voice dangerous. What are you talking about? The exam day, my mysterious food poisoning that made me miss the biggest test of my life. The apple I ate that morning, I remember now that it tasted wrong, slightly bitter. But I was so focused on the exam that I didn't think about it. I pulled out my phone, pulling up a document I'd prepared. I had my medical records from that day analyzed by an independent toxicologist. There were traces of ipecac in my system. That's an emetic. It induces vomiting and nausea. Someone put it in my food. I'd actually paid for that analysis with my trust fund money, had the work done by a reputable lab. It was real evidence. It was evidence legally obtained. Elena's face was white as paper. That's insane. You're making this up. The report is from Carlson Medical Labs. You can verify it yourself. I met Dad's eyes. Someone in this house poisoned me so I'd fail that exam. And that same someone has been systematically cheating her way through school. I think the ethics committee will find the pattern interesting. Dad looked between me and Elena, something shifting in his expression. For the first time, I saw doubt there. Elena? Dad, no, I didn't. She's lying. But her panic was too obvious, her denial too desperate. Even Catherine seemed uncertain now, looking at her daughter with dawning horror. The investigation will take 4 weeks, I said. If Elena is innocent, she'll be cleared. If she's guilty, she'll be expelled and her scholarship offers will be revoked. Either way, the truth will come out. I headed back upstairs. I'm going to study for my SATs now. Good luck with the lawyers. Behind me, Elena dissolved into fresh sobs, and Catherine's voice rose in a crescendo of accusations and threats. But Dad said nothing, and that silence spoke volumes. The investigation concluded exactly as I knew it would. Elena was found guilty of systematic academic fraud spanning 3 years. She was expelled from Whitmore Academy, her scholarship offers were revoked, and her college applications were flagged. The scandal made local news. Student at prestigious academy expelled for extensive cheating scheme. The shame was devastating for the family. Catherine had to resign from her position on several charity boards. Dad's social standing took a hit, with business associates distancing themselves. The country club hummed with gossip. And Elena, who had defined herself by her academic success and social status, was left with nothing. She'd have to finish high school at the public school, her reputation in tatters. Her college prospects were virtually destroyed. No reputable institution would accept her now. I watched it all with cold satisfaction. This was just the beginning. But I wasn't finished with Elena. She'd tried to destroy my future once. I would return the favor with interest. 3 weeks after her expulsion, I received a message on an encrypted account, one I'd set up specifically to monitor certain dark web forums where academic fraud services operated. Elena was trying to buy a new identity, false transcripts, and forged recommendation letters. She was attempting to apply to colleges under a different name to escape her ruined reputation. It was fraud on top of fraud, and it was illegal. I documented everything, her communications with the forgers, her payment arrangements, her plans. Then I sent it all to the FBI's cybercrime division with a detailed report. Academic fraud might be a school matter, but identity fraud was federal. The FBI arrested Elena 3 weeks later. She was charged with identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As a 17-year-old, she'd be tried as a minor, but the charges were serious enough to guarantee legal consequences. Catherine had a breakdown, actual clinical breakdown. She was hospitalized for exhaustion, which everyone knew meant psychiatric intervention. Dad hired the best criminal defense lawyers money could buy, but even they couldn't make the evidence disappear. And through it all, I maintained my innocence. I was just a concerned sister who'd noticed suspicious behavior. I was just a victim of Elena's previous poisoning who'd sought answers. I was just a student who'd reported academic fraud through proper channels. No one could prove I'd orchestrated any of it. I'd been too careful, too thorough. Elena took a plea deal eventually. Probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record. She'd never get into a good college now. Her future was ashes. I felt no guilt. She'd tried to ruin me first. She'd poisoned me, sabotaged me, stolen from me. She'd gotten exactly what she deserved. With Elena's downfall complete, I turned my attention to my next targets, Catherine and Dad. Catherine was the easier of the two. I'd known since my previous life that she was having an affair with Victor, her tennis instructor at the country club. It had started 3 years into her marriage to Dad and had continued throughout my childhood. Victor was handsome, charming, and perpetually broke. The perfect kept man. In my first life, I'd discovered the affair accidentally when I was in college, and I'd told Dad out of some misguided sense of honesty. He'd thanked me coldly and done nothing. Later, I'd realized he'd known all along and didn't care. Their marriage was a business arrangement, not a love match. Catherine provided social connections and managed his household. Dad provided money and status. What they did in their private lives was irrelevant. But this time, I wasn't telling Dad. I was telling everyone else. I hired the same private investigator who'd helped me with my mother's case to document Catherine's affair. Photos of her and Victor entering hotel rooms. Credit card records showing her payments for his apartment. Text messages and emails recovered from her phone. She was careless with security, never imagining anyone would check. I compiled everything into a comprehensive file, then waited for the perfect moment. That moment came when Catherine hosted her annual spring gala, a massive fundraiser for a children's literacy charity she chaired. It was her biggest social event of the year, attended by everyone who mattered in our social circle. Catherine had been planning it for months, desperate to restore the family's reputation after Elena's scandal. I arranged for the evidence to be delivered during the gala, not to Dad, to Victor's wife. I had discovered in my research that Victor was married, something he'd carefully hidden from Catherine. His wife Linda was a nurse who worked night shifts and had no idea her husband was spending his days playing tennis and sleeping with wealthy clients. I sent Linda and Masha Sayesataz anonymous package 3 days before the gala containing all the evidence of the affair plus a note. Your husband will be at the Westbrook Hotel on Saturday evening, room 347, with Catherine Chen. I thought you deserved to know the truth. On the night of the gala, Catherine was in her element, gliding through the crowd in a designer gown, accepting praise and donations with practiced grace. The house was filled with the city's elite, champagne flowing, string quartet playing. It was perfect. Until Linda arrived. She walked in through the front door, which hadn't been locked yet, and made her way straight to Catherine. I watched from the stairway as Linda approached, her face calm but her eyes blazing. Mrs. Chen, Linda said, her voice cutting through the ambient conversation. We need to talk about my husband. Catherine turned confused. I'm sorry, who are you? I'm Linda Martinez, Victor's wife. She pulled out her phone, holding up a photo. This is my husband. I believe you know him as your tennis instructor. I believe you've been sleeping with him for the past 5 years. The conversations around them died. Heads turned. Catherine's face went from confusion to horror to rage in quick succession. I don't know what you're talking about, Catherine said, her voice shrill. This is completely inappropriate. Is it inappropriate to show everyone what you really are? Linda's voice rose. You're not some charitable society lady. You're a woman who's been paying my husband to fuck you while pretending to be a devoted wife. You've been keeping him in an apartment, buying him gifts, supporting him while I work 60-hour weeks to pay our mortgage. Phones were coming out now. People were recording. Catherine's carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. Security! Catherine shrieked. Someone remove this woman! But Linda wasn't finished. She pulled out printed copies of text messages, hotel receipts, credit card statements, all the evidence I'd sent her. She threw them at Catherine's feet, the papers scattering across the marble floor. Here's proof. Here's everything. Your text planning meetups, your payments for his apartment, your promises that you'd leave your husband for him. Linda laughed bitterly. Did you know he was married? Did you care? Or were you so used to taking whatever you wanted that you never bothered to check? Dad pushed through the crowd, his face thunderous. He looked at the scattered papers, at Catherine's guilty expression, at the crowd of witnesses recording everything. Everyone out, he said, his voice deadly quiet. The gala is over. Leave. Now. The guests fled, but not before dozens of phones had captured the scene. By morning, it would be all over social media. The videos, the photos, the scandal. Catherine's reputation would be destroyed far more thoroughly than she could have imagined. After the last guest left, Dad turned to Catherine. I watched from my hidden position, on the stairs, as he surveyed the evidence Linda had left behind. "How long?" he asked. "Richard, I can explain." "How long?" "5 years," Catherine whispered. "But it didn't mean anything. It was just—" "5 years," Dad repeated. "Half our marriage. While I supported you, gave you everything you wanted, tolerated your cruelty to my daughter, you were sleeping with a tennis instructor." "Your daughter?" Catherine's fear turned to anger. "You've never cared about Iris. You forgot her 16th birthday. You ignored her when she was hospitalized. You've let me treat her like a servant for years and never said a word. Because you were supposed to be her stepmother. Because I trusted you to care for her in Helen's place." Dad's voice was cold, colder than I'd ever heard it. "But you've done nothing but abuse her. And I let it happen because it was easier than confronting you. I'm done being easy." He walked to his office and returned with a folder. "These are divorce papers. Sign them. You'll get your settlement. I'll be generous because I don't want a lengthy court battle. But you're done here. Pack your things and leave by tomorrow." Catherine stared at the papers, at the man she'd manipulated for years, and she must have seen that he meant every word. She signed with shaking hands, her perfectly manicured facade finally shattered completely. I waited until she'd gone upstairs before I emerged from my hiding place. Dad stood alone in the destroyed party room, surrounded by champagne glasses and wilted flowers. "You arranged this," he said without turning around. "Linda showing up, the evidence, all of it." "Catherine deserved to be exposed," I said, "just like Elena deserved to be caught." He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw him really see me. Not as an obligation or an annoyance, but as a person, as his daughter. "You've been planning this," he said slowly, "for months. The investigation into Elena, the exposure of Catherine. You've been systematically destroying this family." "No," I corrected. "I've been systematically exposing the truth about this family. Elena was a cheat and a poisoner. Catherine was an adulterer and an abuser. I didn't make them do those things. I just made sure everyone found out." Dad studied me for a long moment. "You're like your mother," he said finally. "She was brilliant too, ruthlessly brilliant when she needed to be." "You let her die," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. "You knew Ashford had her killed and you took his money and kept quiet." His face went pale. "How did you—" "I found her research, her journals, her evidence. I know everything, Dad. About Pharmatech, about Ashford, about the payout you received after her death." I stepped closer. "You sold out your wife's memory for stock options and a consulting contract. You let her murderer go free. And then you married a woman who treated your daughter like trash and never said a word." "You don't understand the pressure I was under," Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Ashford threatened my career, my reputation. I had you to think about." "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't pretend you did it for me. You did it for yourself, because it was easier to take the money and move on than to fight for justice. Because you're a coward." The word hung between us like a blade. "What do you want?" Dad asked finally. "Revenge against me too? You've destroyed Elena and Catherine. Are you going to destroy me next?" I considered the question. In my previous life, I'd craved his love so desperately that it had poisoned everything. I'd spent years trying to earn his approval, his attention, his affection. I'd twisted myself into shapes that hurt, trying to be good enough. But I was 33 now in my mind, and I understood that some people were incapable of love. Some people were fundamentally selfish, fundamentally broken. Dad had loved my mother maybe, but after her death, he'd chosen convenience over honor, money over justice, ease over integrity. I couldn't make him love me. I couldn't make him be a better person. But I could make him face consequences. "I want you to make things right," I said. "With Mom's research, with Ashford, with everything. I want you to be the man she thought you were when she married you." "That man died with her," Dad said quietly. Then I guess we have nothing more to say to each other. I turned to leave, then paused. By the way, you might want to check your offshore accounts, the ones you thought were secret. The IRS received an anonymous tip yesterday about unreported foreign income. I believe they'll be auditing you soon. I walked away, leaving him standing alone in the wreckage of his carefully constructed life. Catherine and Elena moved out within a week. Catherine returned to her maiden name and moved to Florida, where her sister lived. Elena, on probation, went with her. I never saw either of them again. Marcus, my half-brother, stayed with Dad and me. He was a quiet kid, damaged by the chaos, but not corrupted by it. He'd always been kind to me in small ways, never participating in the cruelty, sometimes defending me when he thought no one was listening. I had no quarrel with Marcus. Dad threw himself into his work, barely home, avoiding me. The IRS audit was brutal, resulting in massive fines and penalties. His business reputation suffered. His social standing crumbled. He became a cautionary tale about hubris and hidden corruption. I started my senior year at a new private school, using funds from my now substantial investment portfolio. My $500,000 had grown to nearly $2 million through careful trading and advanced knowledge of market movements. I was financially independent, academically successful, and finally free. But I still had one more score to settle. William Ashford. Taking down Ashford required patience and precision. He was powerful, connected, and ruthless. A frontal assault would fail. I needed to be subtle, to build an overwhelming case before he ever saw me coming. I spent my senior year of high school building that case. I used my mother's research as a foundation, then expanded it. I hired forensic accountants to trace Pharmatech's financial records, looking for evidence of the payoffs and cover-ups. I found my mother's former colleagues, the ones who'd been fired or forced out when they'd questioned the decision to shelve her research. I tracked down patients who'd participated in early trials of Mom's treatment, patients who'd shown remarkable improvement before the trials were mysteriously discontinued. I compiled medical records, financial documents, email trails, testimony from whistleblowers. I built a case that showed systematic corruption, bribery, murder, and medical malpractice spanning 15 years. And then I took it to the media, not to a small local news station, but to Michelle Tran, an investigative journalist for a major national news network known for her takedowns of corporate corruption. She'd won a Pulitzer 2 years ago for exposing fraud in the defense industry. She was perfect. I sent her everything anonymously at first, just enough to pique her interest. When she started investigating, I gradually revealed more information, always through encrypted channels, always untraceable. I guided her investigation like a conductor leading an orchestra, helping her find the right sources, the right documents, the right connections. 6 months into my investigation, Michelle published her first article. Pharmaceutical giant accused of burying life-saving cancer research to protect profits. The article was devastating. It detailed my mother's research, showed the promise it had held, and documented Pharmatech's decision to shelve it despite positive trial results. It included testimony from researchers who'd been pressured to falsify data. It showed the financial incentive, billions of dollars in revenue from existing cancer drugs that would have been obsolete if Mom's treatment had been developed. The public outcry was immediate and intense. Patient advocacy groups demanded investigations. Politicians called for hearings. Pharmatech's stock price plummeted. 2 weeks later, Michelle published her second article, The Mysterious Death of Dr. Helen Chen. Did Pharmatech murder a brilliant scientist? This article was even more explosive. It presented my mother's journals, her fears, her documentation of suspicious events. It included the toxicology report I'd had done, the one showing traces of poison in my own system from the day of my exam, drawing parallels to Mom's symptoms. It interviewed former Pharmatech employees who spoke anonymously about the company's ruthless tactics. The article stopped just short of direct accusations, but the implications were clear. Pharmatech had murdered my mother to protect their profits. The FBI opened an investigation the same day. Over the next year, as I started college at MIT on a full scholarship, the case against Pharmatech and William Ashford grew. The FBI investigation expanded into a full-scale criminal probe. The SEC investigated securities fraud. Multiple whistleblowers came forward, protected by federal law, detailing years of corruption, bribery, and potentially criminal medical trials. Ashford was indicted on multiple counts: conspiracy to commit murder, securities fraud, racketeering, and bribery. The trial was a media sensation, with Michelle Tran covering every development. The prosecution used my mother's research as evidence, presenting it to show motive. They brought in the toxicologist who'd examined my medical records, establishing a pattern of poisoning. They showed the financial records proving that Dad and several other people had been paid off to stay quiet. Dad was called as a witness. He'd been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony. I watched from the gallery as he admitted everything: the meeting where Ashford had threatened him, the payment he'd accepted, his suspicions about Helen's death that he'd buried for money. He looked 20 years older, broken by the weight of his choices. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, they found Ashford guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Pharmatech was forced to pay a multi-billion-dollar settlement to victims and families affected by their decision to shelve my mother's research. The company went bankrupt within a year, broken apart and sold off in pieces, and my mother's research was finally released to the public domain. Multiple pharmaceutical companies began developing treatments based on her work. Within 5 years, her treatment would help save thousands of lives, would revolutionize cancer care, would become exactly what she'd dreamed it would be. She'd been vindicated. Her death had been avenged. Her work had been honored. I stood at her grave the day Ashford's sentence was announced, wearing her necklace, carrying flowers. "I did it, Mom," I said softly. "I made them pay, all of them." The wind rustled through the trees, and I imagined it was her voice, telling me she was proud. 5 years after my rebirth, I was 21 years old in body and 38 in memory. I'd graduated from MIT with a double major in biochemical engineering and computer science. I'd used my investment portfolio, now worth over $10 million, to start my own pharmaceutical research company, dedicated to developing treatments for rare cancers. I'd named it Chen Research Institute after my mother. Dad and I had reached a detente. He'd testified against Ashford, had paid his penalties to the IRS, had donated most of his remaining wealth to cancer research charities. He lived quietly now, working as a consultant, trying to rebuild some semblance of integrity. We spoke occasionally, stiffly, two people bound by blood but separated by history. I didn't forgive him, but I no longer actively hated him. He was just a sad, broken man who'd made terrible choices and would live with the consequences forever. Marcus had turned out well, despite everything. He'd gone to college, studied environmental science, and was working for a nonprofit. We remained in contact, had even grown close. He was the only member of that family I genuinely cared about. Elena had eventually gone to community college under her real name, her criminal record making better schools impossible. She worked as a receptionist somewhere, her dreams of Ivy League glory and social status ashes. I'd heard through Marcus that she'd gotten therapy, that she was trying to become a better person. I didn't care enough to verify it. She was simply irrelevant to my life now. Catherine had remarried some retired businessman in Florida and was living a quiet life far from the social circles she'd once commanded. I never thought about her anymore. On my 21st birthday, I threw myself a party. A real party at a nice venue with friends I'd made in college, colleagues from my research institute, and people who genuinely cared about me. Mr. Patterson attended, bringing a toast to my mother's memory. Maria came crying happy tears at seeing me successful and independent. Even Dad showed up, standing awkwardly in the corner, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I wore my mother's necklace and her wedding ring, which I now wore on my right hand. I'd had her research papers framed and hung in my office. Her memory lived on, not as a sad ghost, but as an inspiring legacy. At midnight, when everyone sang happy birthday and I blew out the candles on my cake, I made a wish. Not for revenge. I'd had enough of that. Not for my family's love. I didn't need it anymore. I wished for my mother's research to continue saving lives, for her dream to live on. Later, after the guests had left and I was alone in my apartment, a beautiful space I'd bought with my own money, decorated with my own taste, filled with my own achievements, I opened the box of my mother's letters one more time. Dear Iris, the final letter read, by the time you read this, you'll have grown into the woman I always knew you'd become. Brilliant, strong, capable, kind. The world will be better for having you in it. I'm sorry I couldn't stay to see it, but I'm watching over you always. Live boldly, my darling girl. Love fiercely. Fight for what's right. And never, ever let anyone make you feel small. You are infinite. You are enough. You are loved. Always, Mom. I traced the words with my finger, tears streaming down my face. Happy tears this time, not bitter ones. I'd been given a second chance at life, and I'd used it for justice, for vindication, for truth. But more than that, I'd used it to become the person my mother had believed I could be. Not defined by my family's cruelty, not limited by their expectations, not broken by their abuse. I was Dr. Iris Chen, CEO of Chen Research Institute, millionaire researcher and survivor. I was my mother's daughter in all the ways that mattered, and I'd never celebrate a birthday with my so-called family again, because I didn't need them. I never had. I had myself. I had my mother's memory. I had the future I'd built with my own hands and my own mind. That was enough. That was everything. 10 years after my rebirth, I was 31 again, the age I'd been when I died in my first life, driving to Marcus's wedding through that rainstorm. This time, there was no wedding invitation. Elena and I hadn't spoken in a decade. Dad and I maintained only the most distant relationship. Catherine was a stranger, but Marcus and I were close, and when he did get married, to a wonderful woman named Stephanie who actually loved him, I was there in the front row, genuinely happy for him. My life looked nothing like my first life. I ran a successful research company that was on the verge of a major breakthrough in pancreatic cancer treatment. I had a beautiful home, close friends, a dating life that was finally healthy now that I'd worked through my trauma with a good therapist. I'd traveled the world, published papers in major medical journals, given TED Talks about pharmaceutical ethics and corporate responsibility. I'd even reconnected with some of my mother's old friends, people who remembered her brilliance and kindness, who shared stories that helped me know her better. Through them, I'd learned that she'd been funny, adventurous, passionate about her work, but also about living fully. I'd learned that she'd fought fiercely for her research because she'd lost her own mother to cancer and couldn't bear to see others suffer the same way. I'd inherited her passion along with her memories. Her fight had become my fight. On the anniversary of her death, I visited her grave as I did every year, but this time I brought something special, the first prototype of a new cancer treatment based on her original research developed by my team at the Institute. "We did it, Mom," I said, placing the vial gently against her headstone. "Your research is saving lives. Hundreds of people are alive because of your work. Thousands more will be saved in the years to come. You changed the world." The spring sun was warm on my face and birds sang in the trees overhead. It was a beautiful day full of possibility. My phone buzzed with a message from Michelle Tran, the journalist who'd helped bring down Ashford. She'd become a friend over the years, occasionally checking in on my work and the progress of my mother's research. "Iris, the FDA just fast-tracked your pancreatic cancer treatment for approval. Congratulations. Your mom would be so proud." I smiled, tears blurring my vision. The treatment would be named the Chen Protocol after my mother. Her name would be in medical textbooks, spoken with respect in hospitals and research institutes around the world. She'd be remembered not as a victim, but as a pioneer. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, Elena was living her small life, diminished by her own choices. Catherine was growing old with her regrets. Dad was alone with his guilt. They'd all gotten exactly what they deserved, not through my continued vengeance, but through the natural consequences of their own actions. And I'd gotten what I deserved too, a life of purpose, achievement, and genuine connection, a life my mother would have been proud of. I'd been reborn with foreknowledge, with a chance to rewrite my story. I'd used that gift not just for revenge, though revenge had been sweet, but for justice, for healing, for building something meaningful. Some people thought my story was about getting even, about destroying the family that had hurt me. But it wasn't. It was about refusing to be destroyed. It was about taking the pain and the betrayal and the cruelty and transforming them into something powerful and good. It was about honoring my mother by becoming the person she'd raised me to be. Brilliant, kind, fierce, and unbreakable. They'd forgotten my sweet 16th birthday all those years ago, too absorbed in their own selfishness to care about a shy, quiet girl who didn't fight back. They'd underestimated me, dismissed me, thought I'd always be the victim. They'd been wrong. After my rebirth, I'd never celebrated another birthday with them, and I'd never needed to. I'd built a life worth celebrating on my own terms, surrounded by people who actually loved me, doing work that actually mattered. That was the best revenge of all. Living well, living fully, living authentically as the woman I was always meant to be. I raised a glass of wine to the city, to the future, to my mother's memory, to second chances, I said softly, and to never letting anyone make you forget your worth. The city lights glittered below, full of possibility, full of life, and I smiled, truly smiled, free at last.